Thank you for being here for our C plus V community talk on this Thursday. We so appreciate you all making the time to be here with us in community, even in this virtual world. And I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Chase McNamee, and I am a senior project manager for the Chancellor's Office. And part of my work is helping lead and strategize with some of the Community Plus Values work. And I'm really honored to just be a part of it and be a part of this team that's really trying to build community. And I want to start by saying that captioning is available. And if you click down on the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side, you can select captioning and show subtitle, and you can see live captioning. And when we upload this to YouTube, captioning will be available there as well. So just to start off, Community Plus Values is an initiative that was started a few years ago, just really focused on how we build a sense of belonging and community and inclusivity on campus, while also exploring our values so that we can boldly state who we are and what we stand for, and also what we don't stand for. So it's a really collaborative effort with people from across campus, from all different fields and disciplines, and from student to staff to faculty to alumni. And we really just try to create a space for people to be and talk about their experiences and how we can ensure that this feels like an inclusive institution for all. And so part of that is our webinar series. As we've entered into this unreal virtual world here, we have tried to do these webinars each week, and we've carried on since March 19th. And we are really honored to have this space here today to talk again about racial justice and continue the conversation. And so first, before we get started with our amazing panelists here, I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot going on, and I want to open up this space and just honor that we know folks have so much going on physically, mentally, emotionally, and with everything with the pandemic and this constant and continued battle against institutional racism and injustice and bias. And we recognize that also members of our community were affected by the announcement on Tuesday around the financial impacts of COVID. And we just want to make space for those community members that are with us and that might be watching, and just say that we recognize that there was layoffs and pay cuts and benefit reductions, furloughs, and so much more. And we know that those decisions had to be made, and that our leadership did make those decisions with great care and transparency, and they really listened to the community. And we just realized, though, that it doesn't make it any easier for those community members that were affected by this, and so much more. So I just want to let you know that our hearts hurt with you, and C plus V is here for you. And I've only been here 3 months. I actually started the day we went virtual, but part of the reason that I came to the University of Denver was because of this community, and I felt that sense of belonging right when I came, in that sense that people wanted to change and make it more of an inclusive institution. And so when folks come into the community and then leave, especially under these type of circumstances, just know that you are amazing, you're rock stars, and it doesn't make you any less amazing that you have to go. And we are committed as your colleagues and friends to your success and fulfillment. And I'm here for you, C plus V is here for you, and our whole team cares deeply for you. And we just want to make sure that you know that, and we care about the community. And if you need anything from our C plus V team, we are here, and we'll share our contact info as well. With that being said, this space today is focused on racial justice, and we are honored to have two phenomenal community members with us today, Dr. Apryl Alexander and Dr. Lavita Nadkarni. And thank you both so much for being here. We are excited to have you in the space, and we just so appreciate you making time during this unreal and chaotic time that it is. And so to introduce the panelists, Dr. Apryl Alexander is an associate professor in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology at DU. She primarily teaches in the Master's in Forensic Psychology program and serves as a co-director of the Forensic Institute of Research, Service, and Training, Denver First, which is an outpatient competency restoration program. And her research focuses on violence and victimization, forensic assessment, sex offending, human sexuality, and trauma and culturally informed practice. So thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Alexander. And Dr. Lavita Nadkarni is a faculty member in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology as well, an associate dean, and she is also a co-director of the Denver First program. She has worked in various mental health capacities for nearly 30 years, providing forensic psychological evaluations relating to the matters of trauma, immigration and asylum, competency, and assessment of dangerousness, social security disability, parental custody and access, child abuse and neglect, and domestic violence. So thank you so much for being here as well. And today we are excited to have Abigail Richards, who is a C+V graduate fellow and a Corbell graduate. Congratulations, Abby, for graduating. Even amidst these chaotic times, we want to make time for celebration. And I have to give Abby a shout out. She has been the person behind all of these webinars and driving this work and really making sure that we're thinking about different things and through different lenses. And I just could not have done any of this work without you, Abby. So thank you so much for being our interviewer today. And I'm going to open up the space to you all. I did want to let panelists know that for these sessions, we just want to create a space that people can feel comfortable in. And so we actually don't have a Q&A box. We have an option to submit questions through the chat window below, and that will go to the panelists, and we'll have time for Q&A as the webinar goes on, but that will only go to the panelists. And so if you're not seeing anything, that's why. And I just want to say one more time before we get started, there is live captioning available if you've just joined us and do need that service, and it's on the bottom right, and you can select show subtitle, and that's live captioning. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Abby, and thank you all so much again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Alexander and Dr. Nadkarni, for being here. I know there's a lot going on, and you both are trying to support your students and like celebrating little pockets of joy that we can during this time, which I think is important. So I just want to start off by like getting to know you all and about your work. And then this is also a very loaded question, but just check in on how you all are doing right now.
Yeah, that question's so difficult. Just from day to day, it changes, and even moment to moment. Obviously, as Chase described, I'm a professor here at DU in our Master's in Forensic Psychology program, where we're training mental health practitioners who are going into the field of corrections, probation, parole, policing. And so we're graduating, 25 students tomorrow who are going into that field and doing that work. So, in this next 2 days, it's a kind of time of celebration, but it's also been a time of reflection for us in that our students are going into corrections, probation, parole, and policing, and trying to make meaning of that and reflect on all the things that we teach in our program regarding some of the issues that are coming up right now in the nation. For me, teaching, but also these last 2 weeks doing just a lot of community work. I'm a member of Black Lives Matter 5280, and we have been active in doing various forms of direct action for the last couple weeks. And so it's just been up and down for me personally, of taking this as a time of mourning and reflection of that mourning, and then taking this as a time of action and thinking about what those next steps are.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abby and Chase. I think for me, similarly, it's been up and down in terms of being hopeful and exhausted and angry and mourning. And so I think there's just a range of emotions, and also just given this week with our graduate celebration. And so I started the program, created the program, Master's in Forensic Psychology program in '99. And so I've been at DU for 20 plus years. And I think, for me, it was important to give people in our communities a voice, and to be able to do that, and to be able to train clinicians to be able to advocate for marginalized communities in the court systems in which they are rarely ever heard, that attorneys, often don't get a chance to speak to them for much except prior to their court hearing. And so really trying to educate the courts, trying to educate attorneys, and prepare students for how do you give your clients a voice to be able to make a difference in the community. So I'm really proud. We've graduated about 400 students at this point who are working in the fields. But I think, as Apryl said, we are, we're, one of the things students have said to us is, how do we reconcile our values that you're training us in this program with the systems that we're entering? And can we be change agents from within in a system that is inherently racist? And so,
thank you. That last part is definitely something that I resonate with as I'm being reflexive of what it means to graduate and what next steps are. So I definitely appreciate that. My next question is, when we think about the harm of racial injustice, I think it's easy for folks to kind of remain abstract about the real cost associated with these harms, but how do you see racial injustice affecting relationships, careers, institution, communities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but also for white folks?
Yeah, I think right now we're all reflecting on how institutional and systemic racism has impacted Black people and Black communities. And that's at every single stage. So if we're talking, we could start at birth. So we have a Black maternal mortality crisis here in the United States. So we're already starting to see those disparities at that level. Then our kids have inequities in the educational system. We have the school to prison pipeline, which is funneling these kids out of schools and into the juvenile justice and adult criminal justice system. And then again, if our kids do make it to college, what's the climate like for them? At their universities? Are we still memorializing individuals who have oppressed their own communities in the past? Once they graduate like you and get into the career field, what does that look like for representation of minority populations in their careers? So I think right now we're just analyzing all of our different systems and thinking about how it's marginalizing and oppressing Black people. And again, thinking at every level, where can we affect change? How are we going to be the change agent at each and every level? That the main question I'm getting, especially from white allies or new white allies, is how do I help? Okay, you have all told me that it's going to be beyond protesting, but what does that mean? And really challenging them to reflect on that themselves of what does this look like in your environment? What does this mean for your neighborhood? That might be a gentrified neighborhood. What does this mean for your workplace that only has 10% or less people of color in positions of administration? So if we're talking about being anti-racist and pushing back against these systems, thinking about each and every level where we are harming Black communities.
Yeah, I don't know, I can add a little bit to what Apryl said, but as always, she says it so well. But I think in terms of, so, as Apryl said, it's across the lifespan, I think racial injustice has had an effect. And I think for me, right now, what I see is that there's just, it's just tearing up relationships, communities, systems. And some of that, some of that is good, that it's asking us to reflect and not hold the status quo. I think, racial injustice has affected policies that have impacted education, healthcare, access to capital, housing, the criminal justice. And so there's so many pieces that that need, not literally, to be blown up, but that you need to look at those systems and say, okay, what can we do? I think the difficulty is that these are difficult conversations to have. We don't have the language. We've never had the language to talk about it amongst ourselves or across systems. And so that makes it difficult. And similar to what Apryl was saying, I think a conversation I had yesterday with students was that they were seeing hope, that there's some hopefulness in addition to all of the grief and the mourning and the anger. And I do see, I am feeling somewhat hopeful that this is different. This feels different. you know, I'm almost 60. This feels different than it has in the past. And so that does give me some hope.
Yeah. My next question kind of goes into, there's something different about this moment. And as people are entering the movement, or how do we continue to build the movement, but not just build the movement, but sustain it? I follow BLM 5280, and I think what I've learned is that a lot of people are wanting to pivot, but I respect BLM 5280 and not pivoting. They've been doing the work. So how have those that are doing the work, have been doing it, help support, not even help support, but allow folks that are trying to build a movement within themselves to like continue to learn, act for change, and make sure that this is a sustainable change that they're going to make in their lives?
Sure. Thank you for highlighting kind of BLM 5280's work, because we like to preach. We just celebrated our 5th anniversary just a few weeks ago. So we've been doing this work. Reporters have said, this is new for Colorado. They're marching for Minneapolis. And I said, no, I was with Elijah McClain's mom just a few months ago. And so we've been active in doing this work. Again, that piece of hope that we're seeing is new people are showing up. So there's been a lot of people who are entering this movement for the first time, a lot of youth entering this movement. So we have a lot of momentum right now. In my challenge to the people who are just now entering or who are now community building, are you going to be sustainable as you described? Or are you just going to leave once this is over? I keep getting the question, when are you all going to stop protesting? What kind of marker do you need in order for this to be over? Is it going to be this new bill? And I said, no. As we just described with the previous answer, we have a lot of work to do to deconstruct this system and revamp things. So I hope we don't stop. So for the new folks, tapping into the communities and thinking of the people who have been doing this work. Have you contacted Padres y Jóvenes, who has been talking about educational inequalities for years, and they're finally going in front of DPS today to get school resource officers out of schools? They've been doing that work for the longest, but now people are wanting to hear. So find people who are doing the work, help support them, and if you want to build, be collaborative. That we can work on this together so people don't get burnt out, and that we're just not here for a moment, but for a movement.
Yeah, and you know, I've been able to see Apryl and her work with BLM 5280 for the last number of years, and again, I think I share the call to recognize that this has been going on for a long time, and that, you know, I think what we need to do and is start reversing the impact of policies that have led to that social imbalance between people of color and white communities. And I think, you know, the ways I sort of have a mixed feeling about that all of a sudden things are being heard because there are white voices. And, you know, to be honest, I mean, I do feel conflicted about that because the Black, Indigenous, people of color voices have been there for a long time. And so there's some resignation that, oh, finally with some white voices we're being heard. And yet at the same time, I think, well, if we're being heard, that's eventually what I want to see happen. I want to see these policies change to, you know, to get rid of that social imbalance. And so I agree, you know, encouraging white allies to support what has already been done in the communities for years. You don't need to start a new organization. You don't need to start a new foundation. Help people who are already doing the work, who know the communities in which they live and work, and partner with them.
Thank you. So I'm going to kind of shift a little bit, and this is somewhat of like a selfish question. I read an article today that was titled, it was about women of color in academia and the issue of burnout. And a quote was, oppression is always present. We cannot escape it. We must always fight. Inaction is a privilege we do not have. I struggled a lot with asking 2 women of color during this time to be on a webinar. And I'm struggling a lot with self-care during this time, taking a moment for myself. What does it mean to stop? What does it mean to just rest? And seeing rest as part of the resistance, but also reconciling that it's hard to disconnect because it's all over everywhere. And every time I do try to disconnect, I'm like pulled back in. So like, what does self-care look like for both of you when things are happening, when trauma is in your face, but then also a sustainable method of self-care?
Yeah, I'm not good at that. But luckily, I have colleagues like Lavita and friends who hold me accountable for my own self-care. You know, we make sure that we're having a lot of conversations about this. So yeah, Sunday I had to log off because we're getting so many messages and I'm getting flooded constantly. And I actually had to physically go away. I went to Colorado Springs for the day because I just didn't want to be a part of this. And then knowing, especially for women of color, that yeah, self-care is resistance in itself. So taking time, taking space. We often shout out the nap ministry. If you go to their website, they're talking about healthy sleep and taking space there to just engage in your own self-care, because we can't be in this fight if you're not here. We have too many women of color in academia dying at early ages because of this burnout. We have too many activists of color who, again, get burnt out or dying of early ages because of the work that they're doing. So my message to a lot of them is, I want you to be here, and so we need to take care of you. And so making sure that we hold each other accountable as a community.
Yeah, I love that question, Gail. And, you know, similarly, I'm not good at it, but I think that, and so I would say I'm not good at it, and at the same time, I think what, for me, self-care is enjoying what I do, enjoying the work that I do, finding it rejuvenating, finding it empowering. And so, you know, sort of that leaning into what I'm doing often means more work, and means doing it more, yet that feels good. That feels empowering. That feels like I'm having an effect. And so I think it's a hard thing for me to think about what does self-care mean, because I think it has meant certain things. Obviously, family, friends, you know, being involved in the community, taking a break, both friends inside academia as well as outside. I think one of the things with academia, and Apryl and I've had this conversation, is that you know, Abigail, you're so right. People of color, especially women of color, get asked to do so many things all the time. And I think some of it is we want a voice. We want to hear your voice, and so we're going to invite you to these various task forces, these various things within the university, and that is all terrific. I mean, I welcome that. I think the problem with that is that it's hard to say no, and I think I think women and men who aren't of color, white women and men, are able to say no. And that is just, that doesn't feel like a privilege to say no when you're a person of color.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. I definitely should have been writing that down. And this last question, only if you're comfortable answering. I wrote it and now I'm looking back and I'm like, probably not the best question. But what is one thing you want the community to know in supporting the movement and people of color in this time? And what should we be doing as an institution? And I just said that we always ask women of color to tell the institution what to do in times of trauma. And I've criticized the university for doing this, and I still wrote the question. So I apologize. So only if you're comfortable answering.
But look, Abigail, some of the reasons why we can't say no is, you know, I'm here today because I know we'll have students watching. I know we'll have some people who are wanting to make change watching. So sometimes that's the reason I take on the labor, because I know it's going to pay off in the long run. So a little bit of that, I think one, this movement isn't new. So I'm hoping people are taking this time to educate themselves. Again, and then watching where we put that labor. So we have hundreds of messages on BLM 52A's page right now is, tell me what to read, tell me what to do. And I'm like, that's all out there. Google is free. Not to be flippant, but a lot of the texts that you're picking up now have been out for a few years. So I just got a hold of the New York Times bestsellers list for this week. And it's all texts that I've already read and all texts that have been out for 2+ years on these topics. So again, people are in the movement now, and I welcome you, and I'm glad, but just know a lot of this has been out there. So do your research, see how you can get involved, and again, how can you change your system? I heard of I think a couple of professors here at DU said their families are getting together and talking about a family plan for how they're going to engage in anti-racist acts. I want to see, I'm going to ask that professor later, because I'm just curious, what would that look like for your family? That's a nice first step to think about what's going on in your environment that you're willing to change.
And I would say that I think, you know, as we've been having these conversations a lot in our department, and I think one of the things that people have said is that when you have the privilege of being complacent, people are being complacent. And so to really stop and look at where are you investing? Where are you buying your, you know, where are you spending your money? Where are you, and that is as a reflection on your values. And so I'll give an example. My 16-year-old just went for her first job, and she was so excited at where the job was, that she got a job. And then she looked on and wasn't thrilled with what the CEO and people in the organization had been espousing. And she said to me, Mom, like, this goes against my values. How do I think about working at this place that's my first job when it goes against my values? And so I think having those discussions with children, with each other, with the institution, where is the institution investing its money, is an important question. The other thing I think that our accreditation body is doing, the American Psychological Association, is having us look at, when Apryl was talking about the books that have been there for a while, but they're having us look at our syllabi and saying, are we having readings that are from Black, Indigenous, people of color? Are we only having readings from white males? And again, really having us look at that and say, that's how we can, you know, that is systemic. That is things we can do to change, that faculty are able to contribute.
Another thing I wanted to add, again, on the education level, get to know your community. That in another talk I was in, people in the chat said, I'd never heard of Elijah McClain or Devon Bailey. And that really breaks my heart. So one, talking to other people in the community, reading your local newspaper, supporting your local newspaper to see exactly what's going on, because again, these issues have been here and have been here locally. And so I see for a lot of people, they just simply weren't informed.
Yeah. As a graduate student and not from Denver or Colorado, it's so easy to just think you're going to come here for 2 years, so you don't get as engaged with the community, and we're so siloed as programs that it's so hard to learn more about what's happening in Denver, get involved with Denver. And I know that I recently started doing that in the last year, as I now know I'm staying in Denver, but in my first 2 years, I didn't really take that time, and I wasn't really encouraged to kind of, you know, we're a private university for the public good. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But, you know, what does it mean to then also incorporate our syllabi, to incorporate getting to know the Denver community and what we can do for the Denver community?
And that's especially relevant in our program because our students are at field placement sites in the community. So I do encourage them. I was like, no, you have to start reading the newspaper and things like that. I teach a public policy and advocacy class in GSPP. And I start with current events and things like that. Were you aware this was happening, that these people are making decisions on your behalf without you being at the table? And so even as a student, even if you don't stay here, your identity for these 2 or 4 years or 5 plus are in this Denver community. So do you know who's here and what's going on, especially for our students who are doing work within the community?
Thank you. And so questions are now open, so you can submit the questions. One of our questions that we got is, first I want to say I've loved seeing BLM 5280's work. I just wanted to say I especially appreciate continuing to hold radical spaces in the face of co-optation. My question is, how do you balance creating spaces of healing through action, marches, events versus practicing self-care through just removing yourself from the space entirely? Any sort of protest is exhausting work. Finding that care and community versus self is hard to balance. Thank you all for your time and effort.
Thank you, June. That these were conversations that we had as a chapter a lot in the last couple weeks. COVID is still real. So if we're talking about protesting, that's placing community members at risk. And we have several members who have disabilities or who are immunocompromised who just physically can't be out there. So one, people have asked, why haven't we held so many rallies and marches and protests? It's because we're still not safe from COVID, and that was real, and we were really intentional about that. And two, some of these spaces weren't safe as well. You probably read that there has been a lot of co-option of these marches as of late. And so that's been something that we're concerned about. I've been encouraging people who, if you are starting to get into community organizing, taking some of the trainings. I believe iRise had one last week on community organizing and how to do it safely. That I've talked to some young people. Do you have street medics there? Do you have legal recorders there? And they're like, what are those? And so a lot of work goes into, again, planning direct actions. People are doing that recklessly and not in not safe ways. So just wanting to kind of say that if you are looking for these spaces, make sure you're looking to see if the environment is safe. And again, that self-care component that one, we don't want to burn ourselves out. So we're spacing out our direct actions, or some of our direct actions the community doesn't see. So you don't see us paying for people's medical bills. You don't see us bailing protesters out who are injured. Those are a lot of things that we're doing behind the scenes with our money. We're building our 3rd year of our Freedom School. So those are kind of things that we have to just take time with some of that self-care component as well.
I would add, April, one of the things, in terms of the racism pandemic in the midst of the COVID pandemic is that safety concern for people who are immunocompromised. I think one of the things that you all did that BLM 5280 did was a car parade, so that people could be a part of the protest, but be in a safe format. And so I do think there's various ways. I think the other ways are looking at the communities in which you live, and if you're expecting your work or your school district or your neighborhood restaurant, if they haven't crafted a statement or if they haven't espoused something that they believe in to denounce racism and systemic violence, maybe ask them to, encourage them to, help them write something, so that there's so many ways that I think you can help without protesting if you aren't able to do that safely.
Thank you both. Another question is, how can white staff at DU support our Black students and students of color and hold space for their voice while not taking away from their voice by speaking for them, but at the same time, not putting more pressure on them to share their voice?
Absolutely. GSPP has had a few student town halls, some that were open to the community, and then a seat at the table, which is for our students, faculty, and staff of color to have some of these conversations. And one of the things that I did hear from students is, first, our white staff and faculty aren't even talking about this. What does it look like to go into a meeting and nobody is addressing what's going on in the world around us? That's hurtful. I know myself, when I was doing some of the meetings when this first started and nobody was addressing, I'm like, am I the only one looking at this? Do people care? And so I think it is first opening that space to have these conversations on how the students are feeling, because they aren't often getting those spaces, whether it's staff or faculty discomfort in holding those spaces, or just not holding those spaces altogether. You know, again, during this listening tour, I hope us, people who are in better positions to create change, are listening, in that we can put our positions of speaking for our students and others, that we're the ones that need to be communicating their needs to other faculty, to other students, to other staff, to administration. So I think that's one way that is effective allyship, of listening, hearing, and then seeing, again, where we can act.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think for us, we really do have we try to incorporate diversity and inclusion in each of those courses. Through some success, you know, it varies. But I think students of color have said, sometimes that feels like it's for white students and it isn't for us. And we're the ones that are educating all the time. I think part of, you know, I mean, I think just in the society in which we live, I think there's a tendency to be fixers, and that we want to affect change. And so I think for white faculty and staff, when students, and I'm guilty of this myself, so it's not only for white faculty and staff, when students come and are hurting, are in pain, are you know, crying because of something that happened, we want to fix it. And I think that's all well and good, but I think we need to listen. We need to listen to where the pain is, where the suffering is, give them an outlet rather than taking that away and invalidating that feeling.
Yeah. As someone who's been very vocal at Korbel, I definitely feel those sentiments, but I don't know. I sometimes struggle between if I want someone to acknowledge it by centering me. Like, I want you to acknowledge it, but don't center me. Like, you know, the "how are you doing" text messages have felt exhausting. But acknowledge it on your own platforms, so I know that you know it's happening. Don't completely ignore it, but don't reach out to me and expect me to also validate your feelings while you're asking me how I'm doing. But yeah, I think faculty and staff of color have definitely gotten me through my time at DU, so I would encourage more white faculty and staff to definitely help in that case, because I can see that burden has also fallen on a lot of women of color, particularly because I know for sure that's who I've reached out to most. So another question is, thinking about C+V, how can we do this work across the community? We often think about specific groups, but are there ways you can imagine this being more than just a moment in time, but truly ingrained in the institution?
You know, I think DU kind of started some of this work last year. I'm going to mess up the credit. I can't remember if it's OTL or the librarians, all of them combined, did a reading series on like white fragility, I believe it was last year. And so I think that is one step in the right direction, that they were able to get the group. They had so many people sign up. They had people on a wait list of who were wanting to learn and engage in this work. My kind of question for us as an institution is, what is our investment on creating change? That again, we've had these messages from faculty, students, and staff of color for the longest, where are we putting our investment at? Are we creating some of these new programs to offer students like you support through the pipeline? Are we intentionally, explicitly supporting new Black faculty in their pedagogy and research? What are we doing for staff? We have the Faculty and Staff of Color Associations. I'm hoping that we're lending support to SOCA in kind of thinking about these efforts. You know, there was an article, I think about a year or two ago, and said, why don't we have more faculty of color, Black faculty in academia? And the answer was, maybe we don't want them there. And I know that's how we sometimes feel in these spaces. So wanting to see kind of how are we investing in the thriving of these communities at our institution.
Yeah, I think the other piece I would add to that is the pipeline issue. So if we're not having, if the number of students of color in the high schools is not entering undergrad, is not entering into doctoral programs, we don't have a choice for faculty of color because we're not helping support encouraging retention, supporting retention. So encouraging recruitment and supporting retention, we're not doing that. And I think similarly with faculty of color, you know, I've been at DU for a number of years, and our diversity and inclusion administrators have turned over a lot. And, you know, and the question is, why is that? And to understand why that might be, that they're not being able to stay in those positions. Is it something else that's going on systemically that is resulting in that? How can we make that better?
Thank you. Another question is, any advice to professors who have a hard time starting a dialogue about white fragility, whiteness, and how to be better allies to the Black community without exhausting the voices of color in the room?
As Lavita kind of referenced earlier, just thinking about how are we implementing these conversations in our pedagogy. That I don't know what department or unit you might be in, but I'm sure these conversations can tie into some of your teachings. So, you know, I've taught to people in like tech industries and business. Have you read Algorithm of Oppression? Just talking about kind of computer science and our Google algorithm and how that creates bias. You know, I've seen Black engineers remark on things like the engineering of, you know, the hand washing things that they don't detect Black skin. So that's something that you could be talking to students about, and how do we revamp our systems to build better towel openers and soap dispensers and things like that. Again, it seems silly, but that's ways that you can incorporate some of these core social justice issues into your curriculum, because these conversations are being had anyway.
And I think to what the students are saying, and all students, is invite the discussions, give us permission to have those discussions. And sometimes that permission is having an article that is written by somebody who is a person of color, who gives a different perspective, who and then you can create a space for that discussion and invite everybody in. I think for faculty where, and again, I think OTL has also done, some webinars about how do you have these discussions in the classroom to invite all students, not just people of color, to be representative and talk about their concerns and their feelings. And so I think take advantage of the OTL webinars as well.
Yeah, and they just released the Inclusive Pedagogies website. So I think I've looked through it, and it's not just for faculty. I would encourage graduate students to use that as they're writing their papers, to include more voices of color in their papers, especially when that's not offered in the classroom. So some people might try to push back as this work is being done. How can we call these folks into a conversation? Even though it can be exhausting, we do want change to take hold as well.
I think so. I think there is pushback, and sometimes I guess I think for me it feels like what are the core values of the institution, but what are your personal and professional values as well? And if there is a common agreement about what values are, then that's a great place to start. I think where the pushback comes sometimes is framing framing what is going on, or framing protests with political lenses, and that's sometimes where you get stuck. And I think if you can go back to what are our core values, what do we believe in, human rights, human dignity and respect. If we can start there, then I think we have a way of increasing a dialogue and conversation.
So the last question that we have, what are some small ways in our day-to-day that we can work towards racial justice and fight against institutional racism? And I think this is in regards to people that feel like sometimes you have to take these bigger steps, but what are some smaller, like, day-to-day things that we can start working towards?
Are you challenging the microaggressions that are occurring in your environment? So that's one way in which people can step in. Again, Lavita talked about examining your day-to-day activities. So where are you buying? I saw 303 magazine released a long list of Black businesses. Did you know about them? Have you been there? Let's try them out, especially right now that a lot of these smaller businesses are being hit financially by COVID. I even have tasked students before to just walk me through like your week, and we can kind of examine spaces where are you in environments of people of color, or doing things for people of color in your day-to-day activities. So maybe it is going to Whittier Cafe instead of Starbucks in the morning. So changing up some of those routines to help support others.
I think I'll acknowledge that it is exhausting to be aware of your actions at all times. That self-reflection piece in looking at what you're doing day to day can be exhausting. I also think it's not something that people of color cannot do. So it's sometimes exhausting for people who have that privilege of being able to not look at things. Again, I think we're all in a society where we do become complacent as well. So it really is behest of all of us to say, okay, what am I doing on a day-to-day basis? Am I having these conversations? Students have been saying, we've been having conversations with our families that we've never had before. Nobody ever talked about race in our family, and we're finally having these conversations. And so, it doesn't need to be huge. It doesn't need to be that you are doing things that you wouldn't normally do. There's so many things that you can do in the course of your day-to-day life that are small but meaningful and impactful.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have on my end. I want to thank you both for being here and taking the time. I know it's really busy. Tomorrow's commencement. I definitely appreciate all the feedback that we've got and all the answers to your questions. I would like the conversation to continue happening on racial justice as an institution. I think I have those conversations within my small groups amongst people of color, but I really hope that more people on campus are talking about it and figuring it out instead of relying solely on people of color, but also listening and letting people of color lead those conversations. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much again. It was just so powerful to hear your words and your stories and experiences. And we just so appreciate you making time to be here with C+V. And one thing I was just thinking about, because I was writing down so many things, and one thing I love that you said, Lavita, was that if we have a set of shared values, that's a jumping off point. And I read once that the values can serve as a bridge, not a bypass. And I thought that was just such a cool way of framing that. And you spoke to that. And part of our C+V work is really exploring as a community what our values are. And part of that is what we stand against, which is institutional racism, bias, and injustice, and then what we stand for. And so we'll keep doing that and having conversations with the community. And we vow to continue to bring people into focus groups, webinars. We'll have different activities as the year goes on and as we enter into the fall. We know it looks a little bit different for everybody, but we do want to point out that there are resources available right now, and folks are taking action in the DU community, and we can do more. And so if you visit the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's website, there's actually a resources list from across the campus that their team, especially a shout out to Kristen Deal, has been putting together around this work and what you can do in statements of solidarity and support and actions that are being taken. And so we encourage everybody on the call to visit the website and check things out. And, you know, as I was listening to this, I just thought it was so powerful. And I want to acknowledge that I do identify as a white, straight male. And this was always something for me growing up in a conservative area, something that's been a challenge to think about how you take those little steps. And I just so appreciate you both sharing your voices and experiences. And I do encourage listeners, especially those who identify as white, to take this time to really listen and learn and Google things, educate yourselves, and make sure that you're making space for those voices, because that's one thing that Community Plus Values is really trying to do, and I'm trying to do, and it's always really hard and it's a growing edge, but I do encourage folks to just take that time to listen. And once again, we so appreciate you both being here. We can't thank you enough for sharing what you did. And if anybody does have any questions or follow up to this work, please feel free to reach out to us at communityplusvalues@du.edu. And also feel free to like us on Facebook and on Instagram. We continue to share resources and cross-promote institutional activities there. And we will share this webinar on our events and initiatives page on the C+V website. And so visit there to see this. And we have other resources available and our past webinars as well. And again, just thank you so much to you both for being here in this space. And thank you for creating such a time for learning. We so appreciate it.
Thank you, Chase and Abigail, and all of the questions. That it was really, I appreciate being asked, and it was good to do.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you both again. Bye all.